Welcome to Conversations with CSG, the global talent podcast from CSG Talent. We interview influential figures across a wide range of innovative and impactful industry sectors worldwide, discussing career journeys, overcoming challenge, achieving success, diversity, and much more. I'm sure you'll see value in a lot of the topics we cover. So here it is. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Conversations with CSG. Today we're joined by Dr Sophie Hancock. She's Director of the Scientific Services Division at ChemCentre. Sophie, thank you for joining us today. I guess to start with, you're currently Director, as we said, of Scientific Services at ChemCentre. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, what's your current role? What does it encompass and what kind of problems are you aiming to solve in your division?
Thanks, Olivia. Great to be speaking with you, and thanks so much for the time. So as you said, my role is Director of Scientific Services Division at ChemCentre, and ChemCentre is a very special institution. So we're West Australia's state analytical laboratory, and we're quite unique in that respect. Other states have similar but not identical organisations. So my team's got 76 staff. That's a combination of scientists and technicians. And you can imagine if you have that breadth of a team, you can really take on many different kinds of challenges. So I think I've got probably the best job of all. We get to do many forms of chemistry. So that's inorganic and organic chemistry. We have an emergency responses team. We also have a research and innovation function. So we really get the opportunity to flex our chemistry knowledge and problem solving across all manner of stakeholders and industries. In its simplest form, we use chemistry to answer questions. We're trying to solve problems and questions for industry and for government as well as the community. And with that, we are always trying to really use that chemistry as a bit of a truth layer. So many times we want to know what's in something, how much of it's there, and is how much of it's there relevant? Does that matter for what we're trying to do? We want something in a high amount, we want something in a low amount, and for a particular reason. So we really get invited into lots of conversations, everything from public health protection, environmental work, enabling economic diversification. So that breadth is really fantastic. And I think for us, I guess we think that science creates insight, and then we need value architecture. We need a way of turning it, data into more insight and more information, more context around what does that number mean. So we spend a lot of time really reflecting on that. The other thing being a state government agency is that the work that we do sits within that public space. So it's very visible, and many partners trust the work that we do, and the work that we do needs to be trustworthy. So we're very thoughtful about what quality and integrity mean. Our values are technical excellence and respect. I think you can agree that's a good deck to pull from. In terms of our role kind of at an organisational perspective, we think about being an organisational ecosystem builder. So we love to partner with other agencies. We love to solve problems for other departments, and we love to identify problems where chemistry is part of the problem, and therefore understanding chemistry is going to be part of the solution. And in particular, we love things that are a little bit complicated and require some nuanced thinking. We have great expertise. So it's so many different conversations. In terms of those stakeholders, they have a lot of different perspectives and needs. So our institution is somewhat of a bridging group where we're trying to, work through collaborations and bring others to a shared reality, defining what that looks like. In terms of my colleagues, it's been so fun at the exec and at the managerial level, trying to figure out what is our role within the ecosystem. We have emerging opportunities as well as ongoing work. So our role changes through the cycle of, a new opportunity or a new problem being identified, eventually operationalizing something, and hopefully, if we're able to, resolving something so that it's no longer an issue.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing I would add is it's important to understand about scientific services as a division that we are a hybrid division. So we have both government customers and also industry or fee-paying customers. So we're a hybrid between government and commercial work, and that's a real strength. We have to think about being elastic to all the challenges because there can be a mismatch of responsiveness across those. But that really means that we get to bring the best of both worlds to our customers, whoever they are, whether they're in the public or private sector. Probably my final comment would be around my role really having a cultural focus. I spoke a bit about that ecosystem leverage. It's very important that we can define our reputation, attract talent, and that we can be sustainable over the long term. Within that, then I'm also part of the executive. So directors sit supporting the CEO and the board. And I see that our collective is around supporting that long-term vision of the institution, defining what it is. And it's so important to get it right because the data and the science that we produce underpins many of the state's most consequential decisions, sometimes quietly and sometimes in high-profile commentary. So understanding how that information is going to be used and making sure it's fit for purpose every day for us in SSD at ChemCentre.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess you covered a lot for anyone outside of Western Australia, what the kind of role is at the moment. But is there anything else you can add on the role in the current scientific and economic ecosystem as well?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. I think it's just very important to understand probably our origin story. So we started around 130 years ago in the 80s, and our remit at that time was to help the state manage the gold rush era. People had explosives, and there was a concern for worker safety, and there was an idea that government has a role in protecting workers. And that thread carries right through to today. So our triple bottom line is protecting community, protecting the environment, and enabling economic development. So all of those are there and from the very beginning. So everything we do, we filter through that mission prism, whether or not new opportunities align there. The other thing to add is we're a statutory authority. So we're part of the state government, as I mentioned. So it's important to understand that Western Australia is a global significant resources jurisdiction that's across mining and energy production.
Yeah.
So we have global profile. The energy transition is changing things. So critical minerals supply and environmental integrity pressures are really increasing the demand and the specifications around what credible verification looks like. In terms of our role within the scientific and economic system, we're really at that kind of interface between regulators and industry. We have to support everyone. We don't choose a side. We take that responsibility very seriously. It's all about getting decision quality information. So sometimes the path to identifying what that looks like is quite well known. And at other times, we have to really build a collective position around what we say the right job is with those stakeholders. The other thing is it's very important for us to think about systemic risk. So we're a state agency and effectively we're there to help reduce systemic risk. So that may be from the environmental perspective, from the regulatory perspective, or reputationally. So we want to make sure that things are done right. As supply chains become more transparent, it's very important that we have ESG modern delivery and that stands up to global peer review. The current and future state thinking means we have to sometimes move forwards and backwards to work out what should we be doing today, because where do we need to be down the road? And in particular, I'm thinking around this at the moment because I'm just testing with the team. If we want to be doing work that we're proud of in 10 and 20 years' time, even let's say 2050, then across sustainable development, environmental resilience or sovereign capability, what does that require of us today to be positioned even far into the future? So I really like that cathedral building perspective where we really think what's the right job and what's the right durable job over time so that we have that capability that's going to be relevant and trusted and digitally where it needs to be. I think we have responsibility to be good scientific ancestors to our future cohorts of chemists coming through. This year, we were happy to celebrate our 75th anniversary of our NATA accreditation, which we understand makes us the longest continuously accredited organisation in the world. So we had some cake to celebrate that. It's quite a phenomenal achievement when you think about it. Generations of quality chemists have passed on their knowledge, trained up the next generation, and we've passed that baton and maintained that cultural capital. So we have an obligation to continue that line forward and to think about that preparation for the future technical colleagues coming after us. And in terms of that globally networked science landscape, we have to understand that we're positioned relative to others. So positioning, whether it's about attracting talent, whether it's about credibility, we have to really have that resilient competence and to always be thinking about what's going to enhance our reputational strength and make sure that we're very thoughtful and protective of that position that we work so hard to create.
Definitely. Yeah, I really agree with the future generation, preparing for that, because with the mining and geoscience space specifically, it's, attracting younger people to the industry. And if it's, left in a bad state, then, it's only going to increase that sort of decline. So really attracting people and putting, those foundations down, like you said. And I got to your sort of journey, and from a more personal perspective, obviously you began within environmental geology, as we know, completed your PhD at Colorado School of Mines. So how did your early scientific training shape the executive that you are today?
Well, I was drawn to environmental geology because it requires systems thinking. I did briefly think about being a lawyer or a medic, but for various reasons they didn't make the cut. Yeah, just understanding a rock sample, just bring it down to one sample. You have to be able to try and integrate so many different forms of information. And I really love that interconnectivity. It's the history of the basin. It's the tectonics, it's the geochemistry, it's the fluid flow. So you have to try and put this connected picture together. And I think that systems lens is something I reflect on in terms of institutional performance daily now. It's a very useful perspective. We're part of dynamic systems. So the people, the processes, the instruments, the customers, the things that we're working on are all connected. They're part of that bigger picture. And then they're also interacting with these bigger systems like policy, like industry, like government, funding trends, etc. So it's really quite complicated and dynamic, but so exciting for that. During my PhD, so other than moving country, I went to go and challenge myself. I wanted to get, really into the woods and the weeds with something technical. I think it's very important to challenge yourself in that respect, technically. I was discussing that with a colleague recently about how to do a PhD is quite an identity forming process. Yeah. And it's funny because you go to discover knowledge, and in a funny way, you kind of, end up discovering yourself. So it's quite deceptive, and I can recommend it. In the case of Colorado School of Mines, very well-known institution, beautiful spot up in the Rocky Mountains, and just a wonderful, wonderful institution. So for me, it was around having a very industry-connected university organization and getting that global perspective. And then bringing that forward, I guess that insight that science is global has really remained with me ever since. It's been fantastic for network. You move around, you understand the professional bodies, the journals, the conferences, and how knowledge flows between groups, and how important it is to be in a group learning from the right people at the right time for a particular knowledge cycle. In terms of scientific training, I think there's not enough scientists in leadership. It's a great training ground for all sorts of leadership roles. Science often is about filling in the gaps. It's incomplete data. You have to learn how to be calm under scrutiny. That might be getting your field work done before you have to get back on the bus. That might be exams. That might be giving conference presentations. You have to learn how to make your reasoning be understood and be defensible, and to synthesize information. So much of that translates directly into leadership and management skills that are very, very useful. One of the things that influenced me was that I did look around and see what I would consider poor examples of leadership. So sometimes it's the negative as much as the positive that sort of steers you. And I really felt like having the right thinking and the right voices in leadership is very important. And that can be very influential in terms of what happens within the outcomes for a group. So rather than get frustrated with people who are perhaps representing things that are not very values aligned, I think, it's wonderful to just have a go. The other part I've learned through the leadership journey is around when you start, you're operating on a scale of 1, you're 1 horsepower of a human. But when you're a leader, you have a much bigger engine of people to pull from. And so consequently, you can solve at a much bigger scale. So rather than working on a single experiment, you can solve or help design a system that might solve hundreds of problems. And so that really gets me excited because you think about what kind of impact you can have as a collaborative. I think everything from geology through to research, and then the opportunity to try more junior leadership roles helps you build that picture. And I see a very common thread. So I think for all the scientists out there, step up and find your leadership spot. The world needs more science leaders who understand what's necessary.
Definitely. Thank you for going over that. And in terms of mining and analytical science, obviously you've been in that space for years. So what do you think's changed and shifts that have reshaped the sector and evolved with it?
I think the in the mining sector specifically, and probably also the analytical sectors, the most important shifts are not cyclical, as you mentioned. They are more structural. Cycles come and go. People talk about commodity cycles and all the behaviour that drives, for example. But really, you have to look at that baseline, that temporal shift, and where the envelope is changing over time. So I think what comes to mind is things like expectations around transparency, around verification. Traceability is a new kind of mega trend. Sometimes you get these convergence of mega trends which drive us. There's been the autonomous trend through mining, the sort of maximizing, the making everything much larger. Of course, data science. So there's been so many shifts in the last 10 years or so. I think really that shift from extraction to verification is a good one to pin on for a moment. So whereas in the past, the primary focus was on sort of dig up as much as you can, be as efficient as you can, and those are great goals. Now there's a bit more of that blockchain thinking. Can you prove where it came from? What's the environmental impact? What's the energy consumption of breaking that rock? What's the compliance? What are the sustainability metrics? So performance is such a more holistic and layered value proposition now. So many of those mega trends are much bigger than a given sector, but they've really made their force felt through both analytical and mining activities. I'll perhaps reflect on ESG a little bit more, because I think that's a very contemporary area that we should pay attention to. There's a lot of stakeholders in that space. So everything from shareholders and investors and even activist shareholders in that space, governments and community members who rightfully want to have good environmental performance, don't want to be having forever impacts from given activities. So I think that's a really positive movement. I appreciate there's been a little bit of backslide connected to some of the more political aspects of science in policy and some of the things that influence what organisations need to fit with. But I think ESG is here to stay. And I think these kinds of drivers can be amazing. For example, picking up the mine closure industry, rather than leaving holes in the ground or leaving water sources untreated, it can really progress to take much more of a reframe of opportunity. So, what are the post-mining landscapes and opportunities? If you take money out of the economy somewhere, what can come after for sustainability for that community, as well as the rehab impacts, land, water, air, biodiversity, etc. So while they can sometimes be very difficult challenges to solve for a given site, it's amazing what opportunity can be generated. And presentation we gave late last year identified that a couple of the mine pit lakes in Western Australia actually have drinking water quality standards upon checking. So that's probably not a result everybody would predict. So it's very important to go and really do the work and understand the opportunities time after time. Another trend I'd like to flag is the critical minerals trend. We have quite a number of deposits at varying stages of development in Western Australia, and these are quite nuanced. So the geochemistry and the mineralogy, the production, the applications are all very diverse. And so these are kind of examples of industries where additional testing is going to be needed. It's not just kind of taking off the service list, the items that may work for another commodity and just transferring them across. So there's a need for further ongoing method development and really understanding what is the purpose of this advanced characterization that we may be seeking to do. I also mentioned before that in terms of the kind of wider sustainability and ESG goals, embedded carbon and scope emissions is under the spotlight. The opportunity to try to offset or replace or prevent the need for emissions is a very attractive value proposition, and we see that playing out in a number of ways. One of the key ways we're currently working on is looking at the materials reuse framework and trying to use byproducts for additional value creation and value recovery. So those bodies of work require not just the technical science, but also the regulatory pathways, the guidance notes, the stakeholder education, and so on. So they become very large bodies of work, but that's what it takes to be able to reuse materials. So there's so many diverse shapes shifting, but I think the common thread to all of those is that there's this kind of expectation elevation. We need more data, we need more multi-jurisdictional sort of quality with things, and the traceability. So really, it's not just good chemistry, it becomes about good systems, and good systems of bringing our information and data through to our customers, and whether that's a portal, whether that's a collaboration, whether it's a research project. So I think it's a very exciting time to be in the scientific analysis space.
Definitely. And on that kind of ESG piece, how do you think the regulatory and compliance landscape has evolved, and how does that change things in institutions like yours?
Great question. I think I describe the shift as regulation progressing from compliance to credibility. Um, when I started as a junior consultant, it was much about reporting results, comparing them to trigger and action thresholds, and really showing that you fit the requirements. And that's still part of the day job. But I think it's more. I think it's around proving the integrity of intention, being transparent. So the scrutiny environment is just tightening up, and the regulatory process, as I mentioned, there's a pull for visibility of information, not just show me what you know, but show me how you know, and how do you demonstrate that to be robust and reasonable. The traceability and digital tools are quite an interesting contributor in this space, because if we have things like audit trails, we have data integrity, we can validate things through our system. We have a laboratory information management system, which is a bit like an operating system in the laboratory, but also the traceability between chain of custody, sample coming from site, and also data reporting back. Data is not really about admin, it's about stakeholder trust. And so it's not just knowledge, it's also the integrity and trust that that knowledge has been generated in a way that is fit for purpose. So the digital era is really making everyone up their game, and also giving us better opportunities to deliver well. Looping back to my first response around what scientific services and ChemCentre does, I think I may have mentioned, but our scientific results often sit within that public space. So we have to help others understand what that number means. And sometimes we're anticipating narratives, but we need to be aware that our information is being put within a wider narrative. And we need to give good advice that are asking for analysis may need sort of additional stakeholder skills. We need to really understand what is their purpose and what can we do to make sure that they have everything they need to be able to make good decisions. In terms of regulation, it's deepening, so it's more layered. The interaction between jurisdictions is increasing. Supply chains and time horizons, they all add together. It means that our mandate for risk reduction is very nuanced and layered. We've got to have this analytical clarity, and then with that analytical clarity, we can help others reduce their system uncertainty. And in a complex environment, we were talking a moment ago before about the mining value chain, for example. That's a complex environment. There's lots of moving parts. Reducing uncertainty about the technical impact of something is a public good. So this is really, information in action, and it just reinforces why institutional design matters. We need the organization behind that scientific excellence, so that we have the governance frameworks, we have that capital funding and discipline. We've got the digital backbone with all those verification and traceability tools, and we can put it together in a culturally aligned way so that we have excellent regulatory compliance services that are durable, that are going to be in the marketplace over time, so that we can serve others well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. And I think one thing that kind of stood out there is that trust element. So obviously leading your teams in that high trust environment, and thinking back to that leadership side, what does effective leadership look like for you? And obviously maybe not so effective as well.
So in high trust environments, I think effective leadership has to operate on at least two levels at the same time. So one is that technical integrity piece we've been talking about, and the second is around that institutional integrity. So public trust has got to be designed into our business as usual, and the science that we produce needs to go along with the design of our organisation that can operate in a way which sets us up for success to deliver in a way with integrity as a integrity by design approach. I think for me, effective leadership is a combination of bottom up and top down. So from the bottom, we need that insight. We need those bench and coalface insights. The people who know the data, they know the tools, they know the instruments, and they can tell us what is and isn't possible. And on the other hand, we need this top down perspective, which is around the strategic direction. It's around the accountability. It's around the standards. And we need to get that balance right because they both have their place.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of the people that we need to operate within that space, I think modern scientific leaders need to be hybrid in their skills. So we're talking before about SSD being a hybrid between government and commercial services. I think the most effective leaders, not only in my division, but more broadly in science and science leadership, have those fluencies between whether it's digital stakeholder skills, financial skills, commercial skills, and also the technical. So we need people who can technically get it and who can also position things and can have those communication skills. It's also really important because the work that we do has real world consequences. We need to have a really good risk culture and we need inclusion as a risk governance dimension of how we work. So while we don't make tons of mistakes, errors can happen. We need a psychologically safe space where people can speak up. Maybe no errors happen, but perhaps there's a better way of doing something, or perhaps there's uncertainty about a result. Do we need to kind of have another look?
Yeah.
So we need to have a team that feels able to speak up, that we have their trust. We don't want to cut off institutional intelligence because we've got an environment there that's not permissive and not welcoming. And so I think diversity is so great at trying to surface blind spots. Blind spots are really expensive in a high stakes industry. So anything we can do to keep that culture and performance cycle being linked and improving is a day well spent. And I think the other part is zooming out. To be able to think at the scale of an organization within an executive, you want to be able to allocate your resources and effort across several priority areas.
Yeah.
And so effective leadership looks like teams directed to the key focus areas within your strategy. And they may be from a number of value propositions. They may be around either legacy issues, emerging problems, and they may be around revenue. They may be around partnerships. So they have their value propositions and they have their differences that require understanding across them, but it really is a wide portfolio, and trying to have that portfolio thinking with how you manage across those teams and priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a sort of senior leader in a kind of traditionally male dominated sector, what structural shifts have you seen and how has that affected representation and sort of opportunities, I guess particularly for women, but also other minorities within the industry?
Thank you for the question. So I've been fortunate to work in sectors that, like geology and mining, we've been talking about, analytical science, have traditionally been male dominated. Early in my career, I recall not having that many female senior leaders that were either visible or available, who, a bit few and far between. I think that absence can shape aspirations. It's not because opportunity is not there, but sometimes representation is understood to signal what is and isn't possible, even though that's not the whole story. And then I'll draw the sharp contrast in the current ChemCentre leadership. All three of our directorates are led by women. So I feel, while it does vary organisation to organisation, I feel that there is really tangible progress being made with regard to gender representation. I think it's really important that institutions continue to acknowledge that diversity. It improves decision quality. There's the moral case and there's the business case. They're both solid, but actually it's about creating an environment where voices can be heard. And we don't want to cut off that institutional intelligence. We really do need all voices for a better product. One thing I've seen work quite well for myself and also with other female peers, male peers for that matter too, is to consider the potential development opportunities through mentorship or sponsorship. So mentorship is really around getting advice. It's a sounding board, it's that trusted, safe space. And that can really solve all manner of problems and it can accelerate your growth. It's wonderful. On the other hand, sponsorship is really about advocacy and opportunity. And that really can be a huge accelerator. So I've been lucky to have a couple of stretch roles where people have given me an opportunity. It's not about being coached. It's about somebody really saying, I see something in you. I'm going to help you do this. I'm going to help open doors, but I'm also going to equip you for that. It's eye-opening. Then once you're in those rooms, in the director space, we talk about getting into a room. You don't want to be the smartest person in the room because the learning gradient isn't very high. You want to be able to associate with increasingly quality operators as you go up the organizational hierarchy, and to be learning from those peers is really a wonderful journey. In terms of other reflections, like most people of all genders, I've had some times in my life where I did wonder if I really belonged at the table. The imposter syndrome can be there, and the doubt never leaves you, but you kind of build competence around it. Evidence, perspective, resilience. Experience is a really good teacher. So over time, we grow into those. I'd also share that I've been able to keep in touch with my undergraduate cohort. So we're actually creeping up on our 25-year anniversary, which is a bit of a shocker. And so the men and women in that group have been wonderful because you don't take each other too seriously, and you can provide a great counterfactual and test each other. So I think you can have different scales of network that can be useful, but remaining connected to those sources of information is so powerful. And probably one final comment is around the role about breaking barriers. So I am absolutely committed to diversity. It's a value driver. It's an enabler. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's an operating essential. On top of that, though, we're trying to build fully rounded, holistic, technically excellent institutions, and diversity is one and very important element, but only one element. And so I think we also have to make sure that we keep that broad eye on what we say is the full and best job, bringing diversity in with that, but also thinking that that also requires a number of other things at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. How has it changed from when you started 25 years ago to now? Have you seen a big shift, would you say? Or...
Yes, I would say so. Different countries and different companies are different. So even company A, company B within the same industry sometimes can be quite subjectively and objectively different experiences. So it's very hard to generalize. Ultimately, we have our one anecdotal life, but we have that network. I think the industry has been quite challenged with some of the class actions and things. Everybody's got their stories about behaviour they've seen, but we really are learning to call out what is and is not the right job. I think it's very important to have designated roles where people can report different kinds of harassment, whether it's bullying, whatever the problem. If there's a misconduct-ism, then it's leadership's business to get to the bottom of that and chart the way forward in terms of reinforcement of company value and addressing problem behavior, because I think it's that only the full job is acceptable.
Yeah, taking it seriously, definitely. Yeah, thank you for that. Moving on slightly then to continuous improvement and value architecture. How do you design institutions that remain relevant as things progress over decades?
Thank you. There's a huge difference between continuous improvement versus value architecture. So continuous improvement is about optimizing the present. It's making things a little bit better. It's incremental, a slightly better GIS, a slightly better reporting framework. On the other hand, value architecture is about shaping the future. So it's really much more taking a framework approach, capability approach, even funding approach to say, where do we need to get to and what are the components that will support that journey? So it's about trajectory. It's not just improving your workflow, but it's really about thinking about your capability. It's about thinking about that portfolio perspective. And over time, what is the work that is of priority and value to others? And then how do we deliver that? What does coherent and stable and confident delivery look like over time? One thing I've been reflecting on is if you have a gap between your strategic direction of your capability and the strategy, and then that divergence, you can actually unintentionally design or produce strategic holes. So it's really important to keep revisiting that strategy. It's a very iterative process in modern governance. So it's an iterative process to keep rounding out and deepening and improving. What is it we're doing? Who is it for? Why do they care? Why are we the right people to do it? Why, all of these questions, and what does quality delivery look like? So we were reflecting earlier on different sectors. That quality delivery or that value architecture looks different in different spaces. So For us, we think about sovereign capability. So as a jurisdiction, what does Western Australia need? From a health perspective, what does the public need to make sure that we have a safe space for live, work and play? From an environmental point of view, what do we need to protect that so that we have a quality environment for now and into the future? And then from an energy transition point of view, whether the impact of energy and materials and the testing that's happening, or whether that's the climate linkage and the biodiversity and the geochemistry in our environment changes. I think value architecture has a lot to offer us in terms of thinking about how do we make sure that our maturity is correct for the goals that we have, and how do we understand the things that we need to do when we work backwards to make sure that we are shaping that future and we can deliver into that future vision. Funding's quite a big part of that because different things compete with each other. So having that funding model is very important. And I think the other thing I'll add is that actually this is a reflection from early on, from my very first jobs and master's thesis in acid rock drainage, is around the time value of information. So if we are able to gather options at an upstream and early stage of a process, then we have fundamentally different options and potentially different risk management and even different outcomes possible. So as well as thinking about that shaped future of value architecture, I think that sense of when we can get information and what's the value if we can get that information earlier into a decision process. I think that drives a different kind of value that is probably not quantified often enough, but that's a true multiplier because we're engineering out future harm.
Definitely. And I guess thinking back to looking forward to the future, 10, 15 years or beyond, in your experience and what you've learned over the years, what does a future-ready scientific institution need to prioritise now so that they're sort of set up for the future?
It's a great question. I think it's such a good discipline to look forwards and to look back and to toggle in that future and current state. Look, 10 to 15 years is quite a big time slice, isn't it? 15 years is sort of half a career, and you can do something very meaningful in half a career, but it's almost quite hard to relate to because when you're in the middle of your career, did you expect to be there when you first started? It's like an even harder version of that classic interview question about whether you can, where were you going to be in 5 years' time, which I never seem to feel like I have a good answer for because it's really hard. I like to say that the crystal ball is getting cloudy. It's hard. I think on a 10 and 15 year time cycle, it's really important to think big enough. We've got to really pitch for something that's meaningful. And if we deliver even 80% of it, it's going to be really good. That's something to think about. I think future ready institutions think about capital cycles. So there's the annual planning process, but there's something bigger. That's changes in government, other trends in financial drivers that mean that at certain times things are doable and at other times they're not. Where are you in that opportunity space in terms of funding? In terms of the hybrid institutions, we've got that commercial elasticity. That can be a wonderful gift. It can also be a challenge. And then you have that theoretically stable statutory funding. But over time, obviously, costs change. So we really need to make sure that we are durable and realistic with our financial aspect. When we're putting the vision with the funding, they really need to go together. We've spoken a little bit about that talent hybridization. I think that's going to be really powerful. So we talk about the T, you can have like a very broad T or a very deep T. I think the unicorns that are kind of the broad and tall T are excellent colleagues to hire and retain. They're going to really be called on and in high demand for this integrated AI era of advanced analytics and complex decision making. I think in terms of 15-year cycle, you want to have built a really strong culture in an organization. Classically, cultural improvements take a number of years. In 10 or 15 years, you can make a very meaningful enhancement of a cultural operating system of an organization. And I think for me, I feel that while capital and technology are very important multipliers, if you don't have the right culture, then you're really missing almost an operating system from your organization. It's probably an underappreciated asset, or it's something because it's a somewhat intangible. It's hard to really explain what one means by that, and then attempt to measure it and track the improvements and keep that virtuous growth. The other thought I have is around reputation. Reputations also can move quite slowly until they move really quickly. And if they're moving really quickly, sometimes that's not a positive.
Yeah.
And so, when you look ahead over 10 or 15 years, you can sort of say, like, what's the kind of institutional reputation that you want to have in 10 or 15 years' time? And what doors would that open? Whose meetings would we be able to secure? So that's really a strategic asset. It's not about vanity. It's about access to to being participants in a institutional future that's doing work that's really worthwhile.
Yeah, that reputation normally moves quick when it's a bit more negative and then takes a bit of time to build up. So that's really interesting and really good. Yeah, great insights throughout. And I guess finally, what we ask every guest that's been on the podcast so far, what's the most valuable piece of career advice you've received throughout those years so far?
Olivia, don't tell me off. I'm going to give you two because they go together. Okay. Double it up, double up the goodness. The first one is from my PhD advisor. The reason I'm giving you the two is because they are very complementary. So the first, my PhD advisor is a man called Professor Murray Hitzman, amazing, humble scientist, phenomenally intelligent, also a hybrid talent between industry and academia, one of the unicorns. And his advice is very simple, but doubt never leaves you. And I think when I was younger, I didn't really get that in a way, not because I was so overly confident that I didn't think doubt existed, because I won't generalize, but I think most people understand that confidence is not the absence of doubt. But I didn't really realize that hypervigilance and doubt, where you really challenge yourself, is actually a very powerful feedback mechanism. And it's also sometimes a sign that the stakes are high and you care. So it's not always because you're not prepared, it's just because you're aware about the performance consequences of something, and there's that investment. So I think, build your competence around it, but that sense that the doubt will be with you. You try to make a friend of that. And the point is not to be paralyzed by those worries. So that's the first part. The second part was from my dear friend, who's a lady called Dr. Jeanette McGill. So she is a PhD colleague also from CSM. And I believe the advice actually came from her father. I just want to give a quick shout out to Jeanette because she actually summited Mount Everest, which is an absolutely phenomenal achievement. So that's wonderful. And her advice was around the fact that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And that really resonates for me as a person who's got shiny object syndrome. I love to just seek novelty and get excited by things. Everything has its trade-off. There's an opportunity cost. On the other side, sometimes you have to start with something because to have a position down the track, you need to have had a bit of exposure and sort of start to sharpen your thinking. But that advice is really important in an executive space as well, because you're working through other people. So that sense of being effective across teams and proportional across your mission space is very important. And then there's those opportunity costs. So if you're neglecting an area of your mission, that may compound over time to become an urgent problem that may short circuit that reputation that we were talking about slowly building up. The other comment, I suppose, that sort of ties those two together is just around how important it is when you're trying to build up long-term organizations to be thinking about the core competencies, like what you're really set up to do that others are not, or what you're best placed to do, and tying that together. And my experience has been that you want to really go deeper and deeper in your mission. And there's always a temptation to sort of broaden out. But actually, when you polish and go deeper, that's often where your competitive advantage is sitting.
Definitely. I agree, especially from our perspective, we're so niche in what we recruit, and I think that's the benefit of it. So I guess it applies to every every sort of industry and wherever you are. I mean, that's been brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. It's been great having you on. Yeah, I'm sure it's be really interesting insights for people at any stage in their career, really. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the chance, Olivia, and thank you for your help along the way.
You're
It's
welcome.
been really,
Yes.
really lovely to know you over the last few years, and it's great to see your success too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, likewise, Sophie. Good to chat with you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you. All good.
That was Conversations with CSG. I'm sure many professionals will relate and see value in the insights shared. Stay tuned for further insights from industry-leading professionals on our podcast, Conversations with CSG. Thanks for listening.